table. The drum was beating. Everybody wanted to bomb somebody. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. So here I go. I mean, fool that I am. I rushed in.
Scott Ritter is here, and so is Ambassador Buck.
You had Scott Ritter, who former weapons inspector, who was saying that if we invade, it'll be a historic blunder.
Yes,
now,
but we didn't have him alone. He had to be there with someone else who supported the war. In other words, you couldn't have Scott Ritter alone. You could have Richard Furl alone.
You could have the conservative.
You could have the supporters of the president alone, and they would say why this war is important. You couldn't have a dissenter alone. Our producers were instructed to feature 2 conservatives for every liberal.
You're kidding.
No, this is absolutely
Instructed
true.
from above?
Yes. I was counted as 2 liberals.
They're underselling you.
I had to have 2. There's just a terrible fear, and I think that's the right word.
Eric Sorensen, who was the president of MSNBC, told the New York Times, quote, any misstep and you can get into trouble with these guys and have the patriotism police hunt you down.
Yes. Well, he's the management guy, so his phone would ring. Nobody's going to call Donahue and tell him to shut up and support the war. Nobody's that foolish. It's a lot more subtle than that.
I think that what happened in the months leading up to the war is that there was a sort of acceptable mainstream opinion that got set. And I think that people who were seen as outside that mainstream were viewed as sort of fringe, and they were marginalized. You saw that in the demonstrators.
1, 2, 3.
How people demonstrating did not get much play.
5, 6, 7, 8. Stop the bombing, stop the hate.
We don't want no Iraq war. Joe Dick Cheney to the door.
So in October of 2002, 100,000 people in Washington, one of the largest, peace demonstrations in years in the United States. And the press just, the Washington Post put a photo on its Metro page.
Photographs ran with an article, but the paper's ombudsman later criticized the Post for not giving the story more prominence. Meanwhile, in the 6 months leading up to the invasion, the Washington Post would editorialize in favor of the war at least 27 times. What got even less ink than the protesters was the release of something called the National Intelligence Estimate. Before voting to give the president war powers, Congress asked the administration to detail all the top-secret evidence it was using to justify an invasion. The press got a declassified version. Most of the media gave it a cursory reading, but Jonathan Landay examined the text closely.
I got my copy, and I opened it up.
This is the white paper that they...
And I came to the part that talked about the aluminum tubes. Now, it said that the majority of analysts believed that those tubes were for the nuclear weapons program. It turns out, though, that that majority of intelligence analysts had no background in nuclear weapons.
Knight Ritter was on top of the most important story of the run-up to the invasion, the manipulation of intelligence to make the case for war. On October 4th, Landay wrote, "The White House and the Pentagon are pressuring intelligence analysts to suppress information that might undercut support for the war."
So here was yet another building block in this chain of building blocks that we had collected over these months about what they were saying to the public and what the intelligence was actually telling them. And there were differences. Some of them were nuanced, some of them were quite large. But it became quite apparent that they were grabbing just about anything they could to make the case for going to war in Iraq.
Over a dozen sources told Knight Ritter that the Pentagon was pressuring analysts to cook the intelligence books. Deep throats were talking, but few in the press were listening.
There are people within the U.S. government who object when they perceive that their government isn't being straight with the people, and when they perceive that an administration is veering away from the principles on which this country was built. They become more ready to talk about things that perhaps they ordinarily shouldn't.
Ayes are 296. The nays are 133. The joint resolution is passed.
Ignoring the reports of flawed intelligence, Congress gave the president the go-ahead for use of force. Knight Ritter's team just kept on digging. By the end of the month, their reporting had come full circle. Sources confirmed that the Pentagon was preparing for war based on information from Ahmed Chalabi and the Iraqi National Congress, despite objections from experts inside the CIA.
The